Keir Starmer is having a hard time on social media today after posting this last night. So he tweeted, "I'm determined to deliver growth, create wealth and put more money in people's pockets. This can only be achieved by working in partnership with leading businesses like BlackRock to capitalise on the UK's position as a world-leading hub for investment." And you can see there Reeves and Starmer, and then there's a picture of Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock. And you might notice this has been viewed 11 million times. Now, that's a lot of views for a tweet about a meeting that he's had with a business leader. I'll explain, though, why this seems to have gone so viral. Some background: BlackRock is the world's largest asset management firm. It controls 11 trillion, yes, you heard that right, $1 trillion worth of assets. The traditional role of an asset manager has been to manage the money in pension funds, investing them in stock market or in the stock market and bond markets to get a stable return for their customers. So people, you want your pension fund to sort of increase in value over time. The asset managers manage that pot of money. These companies, though, have become more controversial since they began buying up physical infrastructure. That includes American renewable energy companies, wastewater services in France, and airports in England and Australia. This has made asset management companies controversial with the left, so to whom they're seen as privatizers in chief. But curiously, it was actually right-wingers who have been giving Keir Starmer the hardest time for his meeting with BlackRock's CEO, Larry Fink. Carl Benjamin is a far-right YouTuber who said this: "He's actually proud to be selling us out to BlackRock. Unreal." And that's got 29,000 likes, so clearly struck somewhat of a chord. The Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe, treated with this, or replied to the original picture with this, sorry. "You're an embarrassment, Prime Minister." Again, 34,000 likes. And Dominic Cummings said this: "Dear Labour MPs, did you go into politics to watch a Labour Prime Minister try to flog the country on the cheap to BlackRock while cutting winter fuel payments to pensioners George Osborne style?" So why does this meeting seem to be particularly annoying to the right? Of course, the right generally aren't too fussed about privatisation. Well, partly it's because the timing of the meeting fits well into a theory which has become popular among farmers protesting changes to inheritance taxes, or at least the sort of right-wing elements in those protests. Now, some of them believe the reason Labour has closed tax loopholes is so small farms are sold to international capitalists like BlackRock, and also, the theory goes, like Bill Gates. Now, George Galloway tweeted this on November the 17th, so 4 days before Starmer's meeting with Fink. "Do you want our farms owned by the agribusiness, people like Bill Gates, or companies like BlackRock, or by independent farmers like Jamie Blackett?" Who puts the case for independence? Jamie Blackett, someone there he's interviewing. So he's saying the threat here is that these farms get sold to Bill Gates or BlackRock. When The Guardian attended the demonstration this week on Whitehall with the farmers, they also heard people complain about Bill Gates.
Show number 10, show Keir Starmer, show Bill Gates, who's had some weird interest in the farming industry as of late.
It's a bit concerning. I kind of probably see maybe the bigger picture of where this may well be heading. We're seeing it all over the world. Big names such as Bill Gates taking over large swathes of farmland in places like America, China, etc. Before we know it, we'll be eating lab-grown meat and maybe eating the bugs.
A tomato doesn't taste like a tomato anymore.
So we've had these sort of theories before. Lots of decisions made by government are down to Bill Gates wanting control of X, Y, Z. Well, after Starmer's meeting with Fink, Aaron Banks, he was the biggest single donor to the Brexit campaign, also made the connection with BlackRock. So he said BlackRock will buy all the farmland and pay no inheritance tax or any tax for that matter. So he's saying, yeah, this was also BlackRock can buy that farmland. And then obviously the fact that people had this theory or publicising this theory, and then Keir Starmer tweets this image with BlackRock, that does seem a bit stupid at best. So what is going on here? What really is the nature of BlackRock? Should Keir Starmer be meeting with them? And is there really a conspiracy to push small farmers off their land so their land can be bought up by the likes of Bill Gates and BlackRock? Well, earlier today, I caught up with Brett Christophers. Brett is the author of the book Our Lives in Their Portfolios: Why Asset Managers Own the world. And I began by asking Brett what he makes of Larry Fink's visit to Downing Street.
It's predictable, I guess, would be the first word that comes to mind. I mean, Labour's made it's no secret that Labour's been, talking for months, both prior to the election and since the election, about kind of cozying up to asset managers, not least when it comes to questions of investment in Britain going forward, specifically, I think, investment in infrastructure. So it's a sign of the times, I guess, as much as anything else. And I think entirely predictable. I mean, there are lots of concerns one might have that we can talk about, but I think predictable is the first word that comes to mind.
What are those concerns? Because I imagine what the Labour Party would say is, look, we're desperate for investment in the UK. We've sort of set our whole pitch as we are the ones who can encourage international investment to flood into Britain to bring about economic growth. You might say it makes sense to the guys who are sitting on the biggest pot of cash because that's how you bring investment into the country. You aren't so sure about that. I mean, could you talk about both sides here?
I mean, the first of all is that it's kind of funny, almost in an ironic kind of way, that Labour are talking about BlackRock in terms of investment in new, what would essentially, one would hope, be new activities, new assets, new industries, and so on, because that kind of ignores what BlackRock is, which is an asset manager which invests almost exclusively, at present at any rate, in through its big index funds. It invests in existing shares and bonds. Historically, at least, it has not been one of the asset managers that invests in building new assets, new infrastructure, new housing, anything like that. There are lots of other asset managers that do that, one of which is Blackstone. So maybe Starmer actually got a bit confused and mixed up BlackRock with Blackstone. But BlackRock historically hasn't done that. It's only just now moving in that direction because last month it bought another asset manager, a big asset manager called Global Infrastructure Partners, which does do that. It's, I think, the world's third largest asset manager in terms of investment in infrastructure. So maybe it's going to do more of that now. But historically, at least, BlackRock hasn't even done that. So that's the first thing to say. The second concern that I would have, and this is much more of a concern, would be that the likes of BlackRock only undertake this investment if it's on very, very favorable terms. They have lots of different investment opportunities available to them, and they kind of scan the world looking for what the best options are. And they obviously pick off those where they're being offered a juicy deal. And so if the UK wants BlackRock to be investing in the UK's future, BlackRock's going to take its pound of flesh for doing that. There's a very good counterpart story to this that came to mind today when I was reading about this, which was that just over a year ago, I think about a year and a half ago, I happened to be in New Zealand, and there was great excitement because the day I was there, BlackRock and the New Zealand government had announced a landmark new deal where they were setting up a new fund together. BlackRock was setting up a new fund to invest specifically in New Zealand, and specifically in New Zealand climate infrastructures, things like renewables. And there was great excitement, exactly the same as Starmer is hoping to generate in the UK context, which is like BlackRock believes in our national future and is going to invest in our future. And I was asked at the time, what do you make of this? And I said the same thing. I was like, well, they'll do it if it means they can make a lot of money. And people were like, oh, okay, we hadn't really thought of that. And then a year and a half later, I looked today, and as far as I can tell, BlackRock has made no investments in New Zealand. And I'm not even sure if it's been able to raise money for that fund. So it might happen, but it'll only happen if BlackRock thinks it can generate reliable, predictable, and pretty much guaranteed returns of above the hurdle rate that it requires to invest. That's the second thing. And then third and finally, I think the reality is that if you look at the history of investment by asset managers, not necessarily specifically BlackRock, but other asset managers that do invest in infrastructure and housing and the like, it's a pretty depressing history where, on the one hand, it's been a pretty negative experience for those who are the users of those infrastructures or the tenants in the housing, if it happens to be housing. And then at the same time, it's been a pretty dismal experience in terms of the amount of investment in the upkeep and maintenance and so on of those assets at the same time. And so the classic story in the UK context would be Thames Water. So everyone knows what a basket case Thames Water is today. And almost all of its really severe problems emerged in the period between 2006 and 2016, when its majority owner was an asset manager, Macquarie. It was then that the problems really emerged in terms of rapidly increasing rates, but rapidly declining amounts of new investment in the infrastructure. And the argument I would make and have made when I've written about this is that is exactly what you would expect with the type of business model that asset managers pursue. They are almost always, by their very nature, short-termist investors that invest in infrastructure predominantly through fund vehicles that are fixed in life, that they know are going to be wound up after a certain period of time, typically 10 years at a maximum. And so when they invest in these infrastructures, or to take the Starmer example, when they invest in Britain, they're not doing it with a view to kind of perpetuity. They're doing it knowing that they not just can, but have to sell out within a certain amount of time to return the capital to the investors who gave them that capital to invest in the first place. So when it comes to questions like investment in maintaining infrastructure, repairing leaks, so on and so forth, there is an inherent propensity to prefer short-term sticking plaster type solutions rather than actually undertaking the investment that is required. Because as long as they think that they can sell when time comes at a reasonable price, they have no inherent incentive to undertake repairs and so on, the benefits of which will accrue 15, 20 years down the line, because they know they're not going to be around anymore. So those, I know I went on a little bit, but those would be my three main thoughts about why we should be concerned about this type of announcement.
And let's talk about the specific reaction to Keir Starmer's meeting with Larry Fink on Twitter, because obviously you're from the left and you're critical of BlackRock. There's also many theories on the right as to why this was very problematic. And in particular, there are lots of people suggesting that the reason the Labour Party closed a tax loophole on farmers was so that they would then sell up and companies like BlackRock would be able to swoop in and buy that farmland. Now, I want to know, from your perspective, is that theory at all plausible?
So that strikes me as being a classic case of a kind of absurd conspiracy theory. I mean, I think if nothing else, that requires belief in a level of kind of calculative ingenuity on behalf of the politicians involved that is probably more than we should allow for. So I don't see any kind of concrete degree of kind of credibility in that argument at all. Strikes me as nonsensical. I don't think the two things are connected at all. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it's very unlikely.
Is the issue there a coordination problem, that the idea that Rachel Reeves thought, I'm going to increase inheritance or close inheritance tax loopholes so that BlackRock can come in and buy this land? Is it sort of, that seems far-fetched? But could it be the case that even if it wasn't pre-planned, when small farmers sell up their land, if they have to, that companies like BlackRock might come in and buy that farmland? Is that, even if we take the conspiracy out of it, so it's more accidental, could it be the case that BlackRock benefit from this? Absolutely.
So one of the so-called classes of so-called real assets that asset managers have become very, very substantially invested in over the last 2 or 3 decades is farmland. It hasn't happened in the UK. Although historically pension funds have been relatively significant investors in the UK farmland. But it's certainly happened in Australia, it's happened in the US, it's happened to a massive extent in South America. Not so much BlackRock, but the likes of Macquarie and Brookfield and others, Brookfield Asset Management, which is run these days, not coincidentally, by the ex-head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. They are big investors in farmland. So absolutely, it's entirely possible that they could come in and be significant buyers of that farmland. But having said that, I'm not, I'm not entirely convinced that the UK government would prefer them as owners of farmland than UK small farmers. I'm not entirely convinced that there would be a preference within UK government to have UK farmland owned more by international asset managers than UK small farmers. I don't see an argument for that. So yes, it could happen, and to some extent, it probably will happen. But I just don't see that there's any argument for kind of deliberative design there on the part of the government.
And at this point, I want to show you a clip from a video from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which has been reshared today or yesterday, sort of over the last couple of days, in reference to this meeting about a slightly different theme, the war in Ukraine.
Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, don't worry, it's not a gift to Ukraine, it's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that loan's ever getting paid back. Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations, including all of its agricultural land, the biggest single asset in Europe. In Ukraine, there's been 1,000 years of war fought over that land. It's the richest farmland in the world. It's the breadbasket of Europe. 500,000 kids almost, Ukrainian kids, have died to keep that land as part of Ukraine. They almost certainly didn't know about this loan condition. They've already sold 30% of it. The buyers were DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns all of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock. And then in December, President Biden gave out the contract to rebuild Ukraine. And who do you think got that contract? BlackRock.
Brett, what do you make of that sort of claim from RFK that it could be BlackRock driving American foreign policy in Ukraine? Does that strike you as plausible?
It strikes me as maybe somewhat more plausible than the UK based conspiracy theory, which, as I see it, that we just talked about in terms of farmland. I mean, I think it's well known that major asset managers in general and BlackRock in particular has the ear of American government in a way that at least historically it hasn't had the ear of the British government, and it's clearly the case that lots of American policy in the last decade or so has been shaped quite actively by BlackRock and internally by people working within the federal administration that are ex-BlackRock people. So there's an influence there. What I would say though is that, I don't, at least to my knowledge, that has not been predominantly or at all in relation to foreign policy. It's been in relation to, domestic infrastructure investment, climate policy, housing policy, those sorts of things. But it's not entirely far-fetched that there's an influence there on foreign policy. My guess, and it is only a guess, is that influence would be relatively marginal. But insofar as it's true that major US corporations have influenced US foreign policy in relation to, for example, the Middle East and natural resources there, why wouldn't it be possible that they also shape American foreign policy in relation to Ukraine and assets like farmland there? It's definitely possible, but I think, to my mind, somewhat unlikely.
A related question, because RFK Jr. has just been nominated to Trump's cabinet. Whether or not he, gets confirmed in the position is a separate question. But it does seem like it's an interesting situation where someone like you from the left, you've been sort of warning people about BlackRock for a very long time, and now you have potentially an awkward set of allies in the White House surrounding Donald Trump. I mean, what do you make of that?
I don't give it much thought, to be honest, because I think that there are plenty of issues around where you can get lots and lots of different parties in terms of their political complexion having similarly negative or alternatively similarly positive perspectives on a particular issue. And I think that asset management involvement in the economy is and particularly in relation to assets that play an important role in people's lives, like housing and infrastructure, is one of them. And so it doesn't necessarily surprise me. I think if you look at, for example, the role of private equity asset managers in buying up a lot of housing, single family and multifamily housing in the US over the last couple of decades or so, that's another issue where, again, you've had a lot of criticism from the political left, Elizabeth Warren and left of her, but also from the political right, for whom I suspect it's a somewhat more opportunistic tactic. That kind of critique of crony capitalism, for want of a better term, is something that does play well sometimes on the political right as well as the political left. I think it's important to think about what the particular concerns are that are being articulated. Just because two sets of commentators are critical of something, it doesn't mean that the specific concerns they articulate are the same in each case.
That was Brett Christopher speaking to me earlier today. And if you want to hear more about Brett's book on asset management, you can check out the Downstream he did with Aaron Bastani last year called The Plan is to Privatize Everything. That link is in the description below.